Alexander the Great of ancient Greece and the gateway to the stars, the portal he called the Arno Stone. It's an ancient mystery. We've had chroniclers recording his conquests. We've had reports of what appeared to be UFOs, motherships, with fleets coming out of the motherships and helping him, for example, conquer Tyre. Let's remember Alexander the Great lived around 330 BC. In the Old Testament prophecy, the prophet Daniel had written concerning what the archangel Gabriel told him concerning the king coming, the young king coming from northern Greece who would destroy the Persians, and that he would only reign for 10 years and his kingdom would be divided not between his heirs but between his generals. And this is exactly what happened with Alexander the Great. He also entered the Taklamakan desert with 30,000 of his warriors, and he lost 10,000 of them in there. He was to meet with an Atlantean extraterrestrial to receive something of a mysterious advanced weapon, something like the lightning rod of Zeus, which was supposed to be an interdimensional portal. So he went into the Taklamakan desert, lost a third of his warriors, just to get to meet that quote-unquote extraterrestrial Atlantean to receive that mysterious, very advanced technology. Now, Alexander the Great and the gateway to the stars, the Arno Stone, in ancient Greek, is located in Swat or Shangla district in Pakistan. It was the area where the siege of Hornstone took place, and which was Alexander the Great's last siege at the height of Alexander the Great's career as the great sieger in history, according to Alexander the Great's contemporary biographer Robin Lane Fox. When was the siege? The siege took place in the winter of 327 BC. In the spring of 326 BC, the site was satisfactorily identified with the modern Mount Pir Sar in Swat, Pakistan by Sir Aurel Stein in 1926 and has been confirmed by archaeologists. Arnas Petra and the ancient Indian forces guarded it clearly posed a threat to the supply line of Alexander the Great's troops, which stretched dangerously vulnerable over the great massif of south-central Asia, the Hindu Kush range, or Hindu Kush, in Hindu Kush Pashto Persian Urdu, as far back as today's Balkh, or the Balk in Greek, Zariaspra or Bactra, English Balkh, Persian Pashto Balkh. Although Aryan cities has the main cause, Aryan cites the main cause, the heroic desires that Alexander the Great had to surpass as his descendant Hercules himself. So Alexander the Great believed that Hercules was one of his ancestors, who allegedly had failed to understand this in the mythological past. According to Aryan, Alexander ascent Arnos Petra is located between the Gural River and the Indus River Valley. The Gorai River is located between the Imau Mountains, present-day Western Himalayas, in northern Pakistan, and the Swasti River, present-day Swat River, in northwest Pakistan, which is downstream of the Hidaspi River, present-day Jhelum River, or Jhelum in English, of the Punjab region in northwest Pakistan. From studies by the archaeologist Aurel Stein, it's estimated that the Arnas Petra, today called Pir Sar, and is located a few kilometers west of the Indus Valley in the north of Bunar River, in northern Pakistan, very close to the current border with northern Afghanistan. So when you start a campaign, you have definitely set a goal in the first place. You have the goal that you're not going to start it without knowing you're going to be successful. So he started his campaign with that goal. You don't start completely by accident, that's for sure. But what could have been that powerful motive other than to conquer the territories, to start this great journey? Many times the children are not allowed by their parents to choose for their lives, the parents having their own aspirations, because many times they hide behind and influence them positively or negatively. In this case, the attitude and position of the mother of Alexander the Great, Olympiada, seems to play an important role in order to nurture her child into something great. As a mother, she certainly does not want and does not seek for her child to leave and move away from her, as any mother would do, but she is initiated into the ancient Greek mysteries, so she gives a strong motivation to her son to achieve something great, and this is the Aornos Petra. This is the main and final goal because there is a powerful channel of communication with the universe. But it also has a peculiarity. It is fluctuating when to open and when to close. This portal fluctuates as to when it opens and when it closes, since it has variability, so it can penetrate, but also the opposite, every kind of entity. So it can various entities can go into it and various entities come out of it. Let's remember that one of the things that Alexander the Great had to do was put an end to the Nephilim, the abominable creatures that he found. Those he didn't do away with, he threw into pits that were covered with various metals, and he built pyramids above them. Hence, all these pyramids in China, for example, I don't know, or even in India, in that region. Now, going back to this, in the communications channels unknown to us, technological natural forces work which transform light into concentrated photon beams at unimaginable speeds. Thus, as they multiply the intensity of the electromagnetic fields of the channel, they also prevent the escape of the strongest light energy. The human organism that is in the center of this energy space, both the strong photonic beam as well as the intense electromagnetic fields, create a relaxation of the bonds of cells and molecules of the matter. That is, its density thins to a certain degree and acquires a finer texture, where it tends to become transparent and tunes in with the high frequencies of the photonic beam. This photonic beam is then amplified by the noetic energy of the human brain, the thoughts of the brain, and with the compression of the electromagnetic fields, they pass into another dimension of space-time dimensions. Human beings, when in channels, are in a state of decondensation and change into very strong electromagnetic fields, where they create a dense and impenetrable shell of orgone around them. The energy electromagnetic currents of the universe can travel great distances in a very short time and penetrate the stars as energy and the planets to reach the edges of the universe without the slightest change in their material composition. Decondensation in energy spaces takes place at a specified time and a specified location on the surface. Such phenomena are also observed in the temples at their summits and at the height of 12 meters, that's about 36 feet, because at 12 meters man gets what we call height vertigo and thinks that the void is pulling him down. Of course, this does not happen either at 11 or 13 meters. We know, of course, that the number 12 is very important for that, and we have 12 gods, 6 plus 6, and the double height gives us respectively 12 times 12, 144 meters. And also the height gives us 12 times 12 times 12, 1,728 meters, and twice that is 3, 4, 5, 6 meters. These phenomena occur around noon and midnight. Isn't that something? The main goal at that time was to close this exit passage, and this had to be done by an Earthman after submission and command, if you will, so that there would not be any unpleasant results that would burden the planet Earth. So this Arnos Petra area was located to the north of the city of Taxila or Taxasila. Thus, the campaign of Alexander the Great was about ancient India and the advance of the great soldier to the east as a central military force. The Macedonian army finally decides to pass through the Siberian Pass, which was and is a passage between those mountains that today connect modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. And let's remember that we have a lot of UFO sightings around those areas in the Himalayas. Now, since antiquity even to today, it gives us the impression, however, that another smaller force under the personal supervision of Alexander the Great passes by another route north where it meets on its way in the winter of the year 2036 BC, the so-called fortress of Arnos, hence the place of high mythological importance for the Greeks, and where, according to the Greek myth, Hercules had then failed to capture it when he had already fought in India. When the fall of Hora took place, that is the ancient city of Hora, that is the city which is supposed to have been situated about the west bank of the Indus, and which appears to be very important for the defenders of the Wazirs, realized that they were in a difficult position, so that they abandoned it, night their city, and to take refuge in a fortified location, where the other the other Indians did the same, who abandoned their cities en masse and took refuge in a more natural fort, the so-called Arnopetra. In the meantime, Hephaestion and Perdiccas, which were Alexander the Great's generals, and he knew them since he was in kindergarten, let's put it that way, succeeded and fortified Oravatida, today's Peshawar, and they lived with a bridge over the Indus River. So Alexander the Great, with his staff, after turning Hora and Mesaga into fortresses, he finally fortified Vizara as a city and moved to the Indus, where the city of Pefkaletida had been captured and followed by the Indian commanders of the region. Kopheos and Asagetis occupied many small riverside towns. So the Amvolima, which is near Arnopetra, he installed the general Crateros and gave him the order to collect a lot of supplies for the long siege. This indicates that he placed a lot of importance on the capture, however long it took, so the supplies had to be plentiful to achieve his main objective, and in the event that Arnos Petra did not fall with a raid relatively quickly, he would rely on the exhaustion of its defenders. He would put a siege on them, in other words. So he had archers, the so-called Agrians, the order of the common, the best, and the light infantry, 200 partners and 100 horse archers, and he moved from Ambolima again to Arnopetra and encamped somewhere near there. The next day he moved his camp even closer to the rock. A few local residents appeared and approached him and offered money to show him the most vulnerable spot on the rock. Then Alexander sent with them Ptolemy and Agrianus and the other tall person and some of his most elite supporters, with orders to occupy the surrounding area and install a garrison and keep him always informed of what was happening there. Alexander waited for the move of Ptolemy, who finally succeeded and went through a difficult route where he was not noticed by the Indian forces and occupied by fortifying his camp with a trench and ditch. Then Alexander the Great, after seeing the signal, that is, the torch lit by Ptolemy, the Sotir, the very next day he set out to meet him, but the Indians, who knew the rugged region better, put up a very stiff resistance, and initially they hindered, therefore Alexander the Great fell back, and they turned against Ptolemy, believing that they had cut him off. The attack of the Indians was very fierce, and although they were behind the Macedonians in archery, it was necessary for night to fall before they retreated. Alexander's insistence to unite with Ptolemy came true, and he sends a message with the faithful Indian Automolus. He is the one who succeeded and fled to the ranks of the enemy, and at the first light of the next day he started on the route that Ptolemy had also followed. So at noon they came into the contact with the Indians, who now found themselves between the divisions of Ptolemy and Alexander. The Indians, of course, fought very hard, but Alexander's Macedonians were not overworked, precisely because Alexander's shock divisions followed each other in waves, and in the end, with great difficulty, at dusk they succeeded and pushed them all back, the Indians, from the pass. What I want to point out and emphasize so far is that his entire staff worked in coordination and obedience with worthy and capable warriors, but also a very brilliant staff of scientists of the time, where he predicted his every move so that he has as few as possible losses. The specific area, Arnopetra, is located further north of the city of Attock of Pendapotamia, in the present Punjab region of Pakistan, and at that time it was well fortified fortress in the mountains, and with the rather narrow gorges in a bend of the upper course of the Indus River, where their fort therefore stood on a flat top, in which there was sufficiency of water existing from then natural springs, and it was wide enough at the same time to be cultivated accordingly. So those who defended it did not believe that they would be in danger of any starvation in the event of an attack or siege by an enemy. It gives us the impression that such an obsession with this particular area, which was difficult and impassable, and why should his army suffer there, is a question that, from a strategic point of view, if he only wanted to conquer the area, he would have to choose the easier areas in general, with mostly plans to go faster as well. So far, our sources from Arnos Petra are different, where according to Arrian, Arnos Petra, or Pir Sar, was an impregnable rock, and the only access was only a path, artificial and difficult. How difficult the access was is emphasized by the Greek name Aornos, which indicates that neither birds could step on it. That's how difficult it was to reach. However, it's probably a wrong etymology, because the Sanskrit Avarna or Avarana, which means fortress of hiding or hiding place, is very close to the Greek Arnos Petra, had a circumference of about 200 stadium, which is 37 kilometers, and a height at its lowest point of 11 stadium, that's 2 kilometers. On top of the rock, abundant water irrigated forests and lands, which was fertile and enough for 1,000 people to work. That is, it was a huge hardship for the besiegers and an incredible comfort for the besieged. Diodorus writes to us that it was a circular rock, 16 stadiums high, that's about 3 kilometers, and 100 stadium, that's 18.5 kilometers in circumference. So it had a surface area of about 27 square meters, and the Indus River flowed at its southern foot. Quintus Curtius Rufus also agreed that the Indus flowed at the foot, but described it as rugged, conical, and pointed. But let's see one by one all the actions of Alexander the Great before the occupation. In the first phase, the possible path of Alexander the Great to the natural fortress of Arnos Petra was the neighboring tribes, the seceded or financed, surrendered, or allied with Alexander the Great, and thus offered to lead him to the best access point of the fortress of Arnos Petra. So his entire army advanced to the point there which the Indians indicated to them, and therefore camped nearby. Ptolemy the Soter, who wrote the book on the Acts of Alexander, which has not survived, unfortunately, but is mentioned in the works by Arrian, the well-known biography of the soldier Alexander Anabasis Alexander Ascending, and the Secretary and General Alexander the Great, Evmenus the Guardianus, of whose last text provided the basic bibliographical reference for all this to posterity, and where they attest that Alexander the Great reinforced his forces encamping towards the west and guarded them with a hedge and a ditch. This therefore increases the possibility that another Alexandrian city with the characteristics of the Macedonian garrison were founded in the area with the name Alexandria Arnus or Alexandria Arnus Petrus, but at the moment there is no relevant archaeological confirmation for this. The first signals used by the Macedonian corps also alerted the defenders of Arnos Petra, resulting in 2 days of additional skirmishing in the narrow gorges and Alexander being forced to regroup his forces. In the second phase, Alexander the Great ordered his soldiers to finally construct around 100 stakes each so that the mechanical corps could close the ravine between his camp and Arnos Petra with alluvium there in the north and vulnerable side leading to the fortress. Alexander the Great and his catapults encountered a deep ravine as an obstacle. So in order for the siege engines to advance and the gorge to be bridged, they built an earthen embankment with carpentry and brought portable materials and earth. We shouldn't be surprised at all this very advanced engineering, because this is how he joined the island of Tyre to the mainland. He built a causeway. Now, and he conquered the island of Tyre with the help of the mothership UFO, who with laser beams destroyed the walls of the city, and the Macedonians with Alexander the Great went in to conquer it. The works of his engineers created a bank about 50 meters high, that's 150 feet high. But the buttress that was created was made too hastily towards the sides of the gorge, and it collapsed and precipitated, falling precipitously downwards, with the result that initial progress that had been made began to it slowing down. Now, so the soldiers were ordered to cut again 100 stakes each, and first Alexander the Great started to throw earth on the slope from the top of the hill, such an obsession where his soldiers were encamped to create a rampart. His aim was to reach the height of the rock so that his crossbows could strike the fortified Indians. On the first day, the beam advanced about one stage, that's about 185 meters. During the next 2 days, their work under cover of catapults from the firm ground and slingers from the rampart repelled Indian attacks on the earthworks, and the earthworks continued. In the third phase and fourth day of their siege, some of the soldiers occupied a hill that was the same height as Arnos Petra, so they built a whole mountain. Alexander the Great therefore ordered his mechanical corps to direct the advance towards that height, so that his bows may be discharged against the Indians from the same height as them. Nevertheless, at the end of the third day, a low earthen hill now connected the nearest edge of Pir Sar's mountain, and the siege was feasible. Alexander the Great, as always, was in charge and in the front line, and gave the order for the general attack, while soon the first striking force was repulsed by the throwing of boulders, which were thrown from above downwards. In the fourth phase, the Indians are surprised by the intense persistence and efficiency of the Greek Macedonians and are forced to ask for negotiations, but in reality they want to obstruct somewhat in order to leave Arnos in the night. So Alexander the Great is informed of this. He does nothing to prevent them, but sets up ambushes and intercepts them as they flee. There's no indication that the alluvium eventually reached the height of the Eagle Stone, Arnos Petra. It was no longer necessary after the defeat of the Indians. So the Indians were amazed by the persistence and efficiency of the Macedonian engineers and asked for negotiations. When Alexander the Great learned that they intended to be stuck until the evening, Then they would slip off the rock. He facilitated their unhooking. Thus, in the end, Alexander the Great completed the siege of Arnos Petra, killing some fugitives who did not surrender. According to Alexander the Great's contemporary biographer Robin Lane Fox, or more exaggerated by Arrian in a massacre. He had laid ambuscades, attacked them, and killed many in their flight. Arrian also tells us, according to Diodorus, it's written that he simply let them escape, but this version is not consistent with his more general tactics. Perhaps Diodorus wanted to compensate for the negative image of Alexander the Great, which he gives to the massacre of the mercenaries in Messaga. Curtius, however, does not mention anything about Alexander's passage from Arnos Petra to the Indus River and back again, nor about the preparation of a long siege, nor about the resistance of Alexander the Great approach to Arnos Petra, while for its capture says that climbers were used, as in the Sogdian Petra. He tells us that the Indians put up an effective defense, killing several climbers, celebrating with drumming for 2 days. However, for some reason, which perhaps the Roman historian does not explain to us, on the third night they began to abandon the fort. And then Alexander the Great ordered the whole army to fall back. The Indians believed that they were under general attack, panicked and trying to escape in the dark. Most of them were killed on the impassable cliffs of the area. The siege was carried out, and Alexander the Great climbed inside the fortress after being pulled up to the eaves of the walls on a rope. So to celebrate, the Epinicians' temple was built, and sacrifices were made to Nicaea Athena, that is Athena who gives victories, traces of which were identified by Oral Stein in 1926. It's noteworthy that, as a conqueror, although far from his country, he thanks the goddess Athena for the victories she gives him, and especially her because what he had already accomplished, namely the reaching of Arnos Petra, was something very important, since the goddess Athena is the goddess of strategy and war, and on the other hand, with her wisdom, would close the Arnos Petra, that is, the channel of communication. Thus, Alexander the Great occupies the rock which was even impregnable by Hercules. It's possible that this is not exactly the Hercules of the Greek pantheon, and Arrian gives us a version and believes that it's probably a local myth, which the communicators of Alexander the Great happily adopted this story in order to magnify his feat. So there on top of the rock, Alexander the Great makes sacrifices to the goddess Athena, who gives victory, Athena Nike, and builds a fortress where he then installs Sisikotos and an Indian Otomol as a guard. Alexander the Great's next aim after Arnos Petra in the early spring of the following year, that is 236 BC, was to combine his forces with those of King Taxiles, who was king of the Indian kingdom Taxila, against the neighbor of King Porus, who was the king of the region of the river Hydaspes. Alexander the Great was now free to continue his journey to Pentapotamia, the five rivers, and the reputation of invincibility seemed to be building after Persia and for ancient India, where the equally victorious Battle of Hydaspes would soon follow. So the person who writes the article expressly and unequivocally declares to you that this space is an entirely entry-exit space-time portal without stability, where the activity of transcendental entities and mysterious unnatural phenomena are observed. So this is exactly why Alexander the Great was motivated and had the goal of obtaining this area. The so-called immortals and the transcendent entities of our galaxy, when they are in the neon field, perceive the beginning of the new creation from the unimaginable flashes of light that take place at the gates, phenomena that give us a signal for the beginning of the new creation activities, as are also our present years with the closing of Plato's Enneaphtus. The transcendent entities cooperating on our planet have different forms of energy within space-time and high-frequency energy levels at higher spiritual and physical levels than Earthlings, and thus with the appropriate control and exercise of the brain powers after Alexander the Great was initiated in the previous years by his mother, and not only her, was able and caused the rupture of his natural pituitary gland by acquiring the material body various supernatural properties, and this only happened in this area, Arnos Petra. Alexander the Great's voluntary contribution and participation in the campaign had as a plan to save the planet Earth and the advancement of the human species. His soul, when he died as a photogenic matter and with the components of the essence of living light, was renewed and then of itself reproduced and did not decay, for it was now immortal. And we must know that the souls are terminators of the rays of eternal light. Each of our souls at the moment of his conception is immaterial and invisible. It is a condensed energy, a cloud, a generated substance, subtle as a vapor. Our good deeds during our life here keep us unchanged in the reflection of the divine being by improving the image of our body, which houses the soul. On the contrary, our bad deeds change us and destroy us completely. Our soul evolves faster than our body and is completely free in its choices, because it always builds our body according to its own desires. When it becomes fully aware of its potential, it rules the individual's personality and thus acquires its spiritual essence. Alexander the Great, before closing this space-time gate portal, finally communicates with divine entities and acquires the appropriate knowledge. And at that very moment, imagine the intoxication of that moment, because now he feels like a very important person, because he's performing divine works for the whole planet. Therefore, for him or for those who manage during their life to live in the higher sphere of the soul, their astral purification took place in the constellation of Orion, because there are more favorable conditions and earthly delusions are more easily removed. The weight he finally chose to carry on his back was massive, but don't laugh. Alexander the Great was working for himself. That is, as many earthlings would, because he had to carry out his mission. After this success, there was delirium and drunkenness, and you need to have a very proper balance within you to endure such a great success, which was spiritual in nature. Normally, he should go back to his homeland, Macedonia, which, as I've written to you before, means a distant land, referring to the first point of the planet Earth, which is Taygetus, the mountain outside of Sparta in Greece. But Alexander the Great has now lost his way because there was no longer a higher goal. As a superior soul, he would have the right to choose his next incarnation as many times as needed to reach perfection and the realm of his personal bliss. It didn't make much sense for him to continue, but he brought a large army and many expert scientists behind him, plus after such a brilliant success closing Arnos Petra, this space-time portal, he also lost interest, but not he could also turn back, since he could not publicly reveal his purpose, his real mission. So he continued on a road without turning back, and mind you, a very short time, and with the means he had then, in only 10 years, he died young, as prophesied by the Archangel Michael, as given as a prophecy to the prophet Daniel of the Old Testament. You can read that in the book of Daniel. Many speculate about illness or murder, but no one gave us another version that he could have killed himself, since his life no longer had much meaning. In the earth, well, it was actually basically, we know that 300 years before Alexander lived. It was a prophecy given by Archangel Gabriel. Many speculate about this, and since the end of his life, since his life no longer had meaning. In the earthly realm, due to the material situation, many times our soul is ostracized from the sphere of its mission and succumbs to the intense attraction of material pleasures. The same thing happened to Alexander the Great at some point, so that he could not put himself and his desires under absolute control. Reference such as that of Philostratus in the Timaeus Apollonius, Book 2, paragraph 10, tells us, "But he heard that it was captured by Alexander, and that it was called Arnos Petra, not because it was 15 stadia high, but because the sacred birds fly over it at a height, and why at its top they say that there is a fault that attracts the birds flying above, sometimes that they can be seen in Athens on the promenade of the Parthenon." We know that even in Athens, in the Acropolis of Athens, birds do not fly above that area for some odd reason. So this space-time portal, this fault, is the channel. Also, Strabo tells us about the rift that exists at the top of Arnos Petra in Geographica, Book 14, paragraph 11. It is a cave sanctuary which is called Charon, a pernicious one that has an aphrodisiac. There is a cave called Holy Charon, a pernicious one who speaks Aporphos Gate, that is, the exit and entrance of the pernicious Charon is a gate which our ancient ancestors considered as the entrance and descent to Hades. The specific channel is a channel for promoting and reabsorbing etheric ions intended for the regeneration and living of the ascended and ascending anthropomorphized beings from Tartarus and the underworld. To put it more briefly, at that time we had very negative energies on the planet Earth, and if they left upwards, they would create a problem. But also, this pathway was a space of invasion, and new entities from space, and Alexander the Great closed these gates of the Indies, from which 72 kings and their people were to emerge. We're talking about the demonic entities, the demonic 72 king demonic entities. He closed them and their kings and their people, so-called the abominable Nephilim nations, which are more disgusting than any abomination, and stench will come out from there. These will be scattered all over the world. They will eat people alive and drink their blood. Also, Plutarch on Isis and Osiris, paragraph 356, writes us that Typhon acquired 72 men as conspirators. Also, the traveler of the 6th century BC, Skylax, who toured India at the behest of the Persian king Darius to record its nations and tribes, writes to us about the canine heads, the dog-headed Nephilim. They were in the mountains of the Indus River and central India, where they lived in caves and underground galleries, people who had dog heads, and all of them, men and women, had long tails. The patriarch of Constantinople, Megasphodius, 810 to 893 AD, is also mentioned among the dog heads. In Plato's Phaedon, he tells us that the underworld is a place of vast cavities in the interior of the earth, which are connected to each other by arcades. We're talking about these demonic entities, these Nephilim, living underground, right? While on the surface of the earth, there are openings which are entrances that lead to its interior. As for the areas of the interior of the earth, these are a continuation of its cavities, and there are many around the whole earth. Some are deeper and more open than that in which we dwell. Others again are deeper, but their gulf is smaller than the gulf of our own place, where, however, there are some which are smaller in depth and wider than our own place. All these areas under the earth communicate with each other at many points, and whose holes sometimes narrow or sometimes wider, and they bring us out himself in other places, and many of these poets have called it Tartarus. We're talking about the underground area. Even the Apocalypse of St. John, there is talk of those who are under the earth. Apocalypse chapter 5, verse 3. And no one could, neither of those in heaven, nor of those on earth, nor of those let who are under the earth, open the book, nor look at it. We are also impressed by Pseudo-Callisthenes in the Acts of Alexander. Alexander also met many nations that ate the flesh of men and drank their blood, of animals and beasts like water. They did not bury their dead, but ate them. I attacked them. They killed many of them with my sword and enslaved their countries, and they fled disorderly until they were fortified behind the two mountains which are called the Masses of the North, and there is no other entrance or exit than between the two mountains. And I used every means so that they have no other exit than this. And in that place I built bronze gates, 22 cubits wide and 60 high, and I plastered them inside and out with lime, so they could not be opened either with fire or with iron or by any other means. For lime extinguishes fire and breaks the irons. Outside these awesome gates I built another building with hard stone, each of which was 7 cubits wide, 20 high and 60 long. So I secured this new building, watered the stones with tin, which I mixed with pencil, with lead that is, and covered with acetine, so that nothing could even open them, and I called them the gates of the Caspian. Then I shut up 22 kings. The names of these nations are Magog, Goth, dog-headed, nuns, horned horns, Syriacers, Eons, Catamorgus, Emantopos, Bells, Samandres, horsemen, that is, centaurs, Epambori, Muhammad. I will ask you about Zulkarnain, and I will tell you, Zulkarnain meaning, I will tell you his story. We established his authority over the earth and granted him the means to carry out whatever he wanted by following his path. He traveled until he reached the west. He saw the sun rising in the bubbling spring, near which he found people. We say this, O Dicyrus, you can punish this people or treat them favorably. I will punish, he replied, all the impious, and behold, I will abandon them to gods who will punish them severely, to God with a capital G. But he who believes and does the good will be rewarded exceptionally, and I will assign to him an order that he will carry out alone. Dicyrus once again took up his course until he reached the place where the sun rises over a people, where we had nothing to protect us from its heat. Yes, it is, and we all know it. And he followed another path until he arrived between two promontories, at the foot of which live a people who barely understand the Tina dialect. This is what the people said to him. O Dicyrus, Gog and Magog will corrupt can you for a fee raise a barrier between you? The authority given to me under my Lord said this is a greater reward than yours. It is enough that you help me willingly, and I will raise a barrier between you. Bring me several pieces of iron plate sufficient to fill the space between the two mountains. Blow the fire until the iron is red hot. Then he said, bring me broken copper as I pour it out, and Gog and Magog shall not be able to pass through the wall, nor pierce it. And added to this work was the power of my Lord's long suffering. And when God wills, I will change this into pieces. The promise of my Lord is unfailing. Alexander himself, in one of his letters to his mother Olympiades, writes that he was given some secret uses which he himself will communicate on his return only to her. The events of this divination being secret, let him come again and say it to her alone. Plutarch said, this is what he wrote to his mother, Priestess Olympiada, who was also the child of the king of the Chaonians, Helen, who possessed a speaking stone, which Apollo gave it to him. Apollo for Greeks is the sun Sirius, who is the ruler of the constellation Kinos. And this is according to John Stogianos, historian, anthropologist. So we see here that Alexander the Great's main goal in his life to conquer all these areas and get to where he got to was to close these space-time portals where these entities, these demonic entities, could enter and leave the Earth plane, okay? Going from other areas of the galaxy or whatever, space, and enter here. And the ones that he found, the 72 kings of these Nephilim, whatever you want to call them, Anunnaki, Nephilim, demonic entities, whoever he didn't do away with, he imprisoned in these underground caves and poured special metals over them, built buildings over them that they could never get out until these gates were opened. Very strange, as it's referred to by St. John, the beloved disciple of Christ, in the book of the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. So I hope everyone has benefited from all this, and that perhaps that is why the Archangel Gabriel did prophesy about Alexander the Great. Let's remember, even during the time of King David, there were Nephilim and giants, six-fingered, six-toed Goliath and his brothers. That was about 1000 BC, while Alexander in the land of Canaan and Palestine, the Levant, well, Alexander the Great went further east towards India, the Indus, and towards China, and did his work there, getting rid of these Nephilim in that area. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.